Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our webinar, Phenomena in Practice, Helping Students Truly Understand Science Instead of Memorizing. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. Julie and I will now return the favor and introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her, and I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years up here in Minnesota. And during that time, I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, I taught honors chem. So I had a lot of opportunities to teach a lot of different kids in a lot of different ways. During my time, I was an NGSS pioneer and advocate within my science department. I also got to be a PLC lead and lead lots of data-driven dialogue, which I love. And now I have the joy of partnering with districts to help them pilot and implement InterOrbit and give us a try. And speaking of fall, one of the things I so look forward to is just all the fall like drinks and treats and just, I know I could probably drink this at any time in the year, but it just feels wrong unless it's like actually fall. So the other week I finally got my first iced pumpkin chai latte, which is my favorite drink.
My name is Julia Mota. My pronouns are also she, her. And I was a teacher and tutor for elementary students in the Dominican Republic for a while. And then I started supporting teachers in districts with NGSS implementation for the last 4 years. Now, I've been actually partnering and providing guidance with schools and districts implementing assessments in their NGSS instruction. And a fun fact about me is that I tried pumpkin desserts for the first time at 17, because growing up, my family just ate salty pumpkin. And to me, like, sweet pumpkin was not a thing. So I was really picky with it, but I was really missing out. So yeah, I only learned that I was missing 17 years of good pumpkin desserts. And today we're actually going to talk about helping students truly understand science instead of memorizing. And today you will walk out and we'll be able to recognize what true science understanding looks like in both instruction and assessment. We'll be here for about 30 minutes, and our agenda for today, we're obviously going to go over what is InterOrbit, first in the beginning, 2-3 minutes of introduction. And then Emily is going to walk us through what is science understanding, really, just for us to understand what that is. We're going to talk about sense making versus, and then we're going to go over sense making and the NGSS. How do those things work together with phenomena too? And then finally, we're going to talk about curricular phenomena versus novel phenomena. And then we're going to wrap up, and that's going to be it for today. So phenomena. Let's get started. And as always, we do a little quick introduction about what is InterOrbit in case you're new here and you don't necessarily know what it is. So at its core, InterOrbit provides high integrity, three-dimensional assessments that give you meaningful and actionable student data that's tied directly to the NGSS and actually useful for informing instruction. So we start with real-world phenomena-driven tasks. From there, students respond to thoughtfully designed three-dimensional assessments questions. And when students complete those tasks, InterOrbit will deliver easy-to-read reports that break down performance by standard. InterOrbit is also about making the NGSS accessible for both you and your students. So we know that navigating three-dimensional learning can be overwhelming at first, and that's why InterOrbit provides innovative tools that center on sense-making mostly, helping students build deeper understanding by connecting ideas, asking questions, and making sense of real-world phenomena. And then InterOrbit also offers guidance, resources, and professional development and sessions like this one to help you and your team confidently reach your NGSS goals. We know every school and district is at a different point in their NGSS journey, so whether you're just starting out or looking to deepen your practice, we're here to support you at each step of the way. And now I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk to us about what is really science understanding.
Thank you so much, Julia. So I know when I was in the classroom, this was something that I really struggled with, was knowing if my students really understood what was going on, and not only knowing if they did, but what that actually looked like within the classroom. So what I kind of wanted to start us off here with today is going through a couple different examples of phenomena-based tasks and kind of asking ourselves what the difference between these two things are. So the first task I want to present to all of you is, let's say you asked your students to draw a model to show how the heat change of the stove affects molecular motion and results in the water boiling. And another task we're going to look at here is, how does boiling water make snow? Create a model showing how water and air particles change when hot water is thrown in the very cold air. So taking a look at these two tasks initially, I would love it if y'all could answer in the chat, what are the key differences between these two tasks? So you don't need to go too deep and note every little difference, but if you could summarize in just like a sentence or two, what are some of the key differences that we're asking students to do between these two different tasks? So one says heat is added and heat is removed totally. So when the stove is boiling it, the other one, we've got the hot water and the cold air. Number one is focused more on the general concept, while number two requires them to apply the concept to an interesting phenomena. One asking you to draw, while the other is asking you to create. Ooh, one starts with a prompt. Representation is showing a model, while sense making is figuring out how it happened. Task one is specific. Task two is more open, gets more at a technical explanation. Awesome. You are all pointing out so many of the things that we wanted to try to dig into a little bit today. And some of you kind of hit the nail right on the head using those words representation and sense making. So looking at this first example, boiling water on the stove. Now, at least for me, when I was in the chemistry classroom, I talked about boiling water and making noodles and heating things all the time. And I will admit, I absolutely asked exact questions like this of my students. And upon reflection, when we're asking students to do to answer a test that has to do with a phenomena that we've already discussed, one of the traps that we can kind of fall into is that students could just be relying on the memorization of what was discussed in class. So if I drew my own model of water particles getting faster and faster, students could rely on the remembering of what that drawing looked like in order to answer this question, rather than truly trying to figure it out on their own. And another way, this doesn't really connect to students or give them something to necessarily solve. So there's no initial intrigue, there's no engagement trying to bring us into this. And really, this is more representing the idea of heat particle motion and phase change. So at its core, is it an issue if we're asking students to talk about particle motion with heating water on a stove? No. But when we are trying to figure out if students truly understand what we're teaching them, looking at answers to a task like this might not give us that full picture. In contrast, we had the boiling water making snow. So for this one, unless you use this exact phenomena within your instruction, this is probably a phenomenon that students have not discussed before. And because of that, now they need to draw a model of something they haven't seen before. So they can't rely on in-class examples to try to help them answer this question. And also with this, students need to connect multiple ideas and multiple disciplinary core ideas. We'll talk about what those are in a sec if that sounds unfamiliar, in order to answer this question. So not only do they need to understand like particle motion with temperature, they need to understand different phase changes, and they need to understand the interaction of the hot with the cold and what and what causes that snow then to form, which is again the question that they're posed to solve. So there's something that's actually drawing them in, and there's actually a question they have to try to answer rather than just representing something that is going on in front of them. And this right here gets at this idea of representation versus sense making. So representation, as the name implies, is students have an opportunity to represent what they already know. So again, they already have talked about water boiling. They've already seen models like this. It's representing something that's been shared with them. Sense making is more students being able to actually figure something out new on their own using the tools that we have taught them. And Julia's going to dive a little bit more into what that actually looks like and what that actually means, especially with the NGSS.
Yes, so let's actually tie the word sense making to the NGSS and to the 3 dimensions. So one of the most important shifts in the NGSS is that it's not just about the science content, it's about making sense of the world through science. And when students make sense of phenomena and problems, they're showing that they deeply understand the 3 dimensions of the NGSS. So the DCIs are the science content that students need to know. The SCPs represent how scientists and engineers actually think, so which is actually what students are doing. And then the cross-cutting concept helps students make connections across topics and disciplines. So what we're really talking about here is that sense making is the process of using these 3 dimensions together to figure something out. And this isn't a separate skill. This is all the core of what science instruction should look like under the NGSS. And that's why we say that truly understanding science requires sense making. So when students are making sense, they're not just recalling facts, they're asking questions, constructing explanations, interpreting data, and thinking like scientists at the end of the day. So here we're zooming in on how sense making is really embedded directly into the NGSS performance expectations. And these are not just content goals, they're performance-based outcomes. And a PE, or performance expectations, define what students should be able to do or demonstrate through their understanding. And it's not just about, again, memorizing, it's about using knowledge in action. So each PE integrates the 3 dimensions of the NGSS. We have the DCI, which is the content that students need to understand, or the science and engineering practice is actually showing up here first. So it's what students do with that content. And then the cross-cutting concept is how they think and connect those ideas through those concepts. So this example is all about MSPS 1.4, and it's asking students to model and describe changes in particle motion. So this is the performance expectation of those exercises that we just saw before. So when we say that truly understanding science requires sense making, this is what we mean. So students showing what they know by applying it in concept. In this case, they need to develop a model that predicts and describes changes in particle motion, temperature, and state of a pure substance when thermal energy is added or removed. And that's when they actually demonstrate proficiency at this standard. So going back to our example, we started with a compelling phenomenon. How does boiling water make snow? So students here were asked to develop a model that explains how water and air particles behave when hot water is thrown into freezing air. And while this scenario feels simple, but engaging, it actually requires students to use all 3 dimensions. So to build an accurate model, students need to use the SCP of modeling to predict and describe the phenomena. They need to apply their disciplinary core ideas about energy and properties of matter, and then use the cross-cutting concept of cause and effect to actually explain how boiling water might trigger this change. So I would love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Do you think that students would need to get the correct answer? Absolutely. To demonstrate their understanding of the 3 dimensions here. You can type yes or no in the chat. Okay, so this is interesting. We have some no's, we have some yeses sent to, okay, but we have an overwhelming number of no's, which is really cool because this is kind of a tricky question to answer, because you would say yes, right? If a student answers the question correctly, then they understand. But rather than giving a right or wrong answer, this type of practice encourages students to think like scientists. So observing, connecting, and justifying their based on evidence. So this is a great example of how we can build students' comfort with 3-dimensional tasks before fully jumping into full assessments. And this is a question from In Orbit. Yes. All right. So again, just to recap what everything we've said, sense making occurs when students connect what they already know, their prior knowledge, their skills and experiences, to grapple with something new. And that something new is usually a phenomenon or a problem that they've never seen before, which introduces a level of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is key. So it pushes students to ask questions, test ideas, and build meaning. So as we can see here, this diagram is tying all of the dimensions together, the DCIs, the SCPs, and the cross-cutting concept to a phenomena or problem. And the process of actually putting all of that together is called sense making. And that is what students are engaging on when they're answering these types of tasks. And to qualify as true sense making, there are 3 key ingredients or criteria that we can say needs to be checked to qualify as a sense making question. So first, is the phenomena novel? So something authentic and unfamiliar to the student. Then we need to have the integration of all 3 dimensions, the DCI, the SCP, and the cross-cutting concept. And finally, a real struggle with uncertainty. So students don't immediately know the answer, and that's okay. They have to really think about those. And Emily is going to talk a little bit more about that productive struggle when we look at curriculum versus novel phenomena.
Thank you, Julia. And I appreciate, again, that conversation that happened within the chat talking about if students need to be able to get the answer correct. And really, this idea is not necessarily about getting them to back correct, interesting concepts we've shared with them, but just see if they can truly think like a scientist and problem solve their way through that authentic uncertainty. And that authentic uncertainty really comes from this idea of novel phenomena. And we want to talk about that in contrast to curricular phenomena. So right now, many NGSS aligned curricula come with phenomena, which is amazing. And the type of phenomena that I've probably seen the most often when looking at NGSS aligned curriculum is this anchoring phenomena. So this is phenomena that is presented at the beginning of the unit, and all the ideas and performance expectations and standards and DCIs all can kind of come back and connect to this idea. And this is awesome in order to gives students a chance to practice sense making. They can see it modeled by their teacher, they can see it modeled by their peers, and this gives a great opportunity for students to start seeing how those individual components, like the SEPs, DCIs, and CCCs, can all connect and come together to a phenomenon. So in this case, looking at and kind of creating a model together as a class to understand this idea of where does maple syrup come from? Like, we're eating something from a tree. How did it come from the tree? Where did the tree get its food? So we can start coming together as a class to start kind of combing through this idea. But we can't stop there. And that's kind of the key fundamental thing that we want to talk about here today. When we're designing those opportunities for assessments, if we really want to see if students truly understand, we need to make sure that they're making sense of phenomena that is novel. So this little table here comes from an Achieve article, and it's discussing what assessments should start looking less like and what assessments should start looking more like in order to make sure that we're giving students true opportunities to make sense of phenomena and really see if they've become proficient within the NGSS. And one of the things that is on the what they should look less like list is it should look less like students explaining a phenomena or addressing a problem students fully understand. And it should look more like students connecting their learning to a phenomena or problem that involves that authentic uncertainty that we've been talking about. So in order to kind of drive this shift towards assessments, what they should look more like, we need to offer students opportunities to work with novel phenomena. Now, easier said than done, trying to find novel phenomena to give students those opportunities to make sense of it. So this is another article from Achieve, and it gives a few helpful criteria for us when we're trying to consider what novel phenomena we want to put in front of students. One of the first things they recommend is that the phenomena is central. And what this means is the phenomena needs to be like less of a hook, and it actually needs to be central to the actual task that we're having students do. So it can't just be something like, ooh, fireworks have different colors. That's cool. It needs to be more about why is this firework red and this firework is blue. So we want them actually engaging with the phenomena and not just using it as something that's interesting to grab their attention. We also want the phenomena to be specific. So rather than something more broad and general like particle motion, we want to give them something like really tangible to hook onto. So that idea of like throwing the boiling water in the snow is a very specific example. We also want it to be relevant. So this is where your knowledge of your students as an educator can become really important, trying to find something that actually will connect and engage your students and will be relevant and meaningful for them in their day-to-day life. And the last one is compelling. So we want to make it puzzling. We want there to be a who or a what or a why to it. We want to make it intriguing. So if we're giving them something to almost investigate, that makes it a little bit more compelling, while also trying to make sure it's relevant and meaningful, a specific thing they're trying to figure out, and making sure that the task we're giving them, the phenomena is central to that task. So now that we have an idea of what novel we need in order to give students that opportunity to make sense of it, what do we actually do with that now? So like we mentioned, a lot of curricula that we're seeing right now aligned to the NGSS has this anchoring phenomena, which is a great opportunity to both open the unit and to continuously come back to during the unit to give that opportunity for students to see what sense making looks like from their teacher and from their peers. Another opportunity where you could start incorporating novel phenomena throughout a unit is using something called sense making practice activities. And we're actually going to be talking a lot more about this throughout our webinar series, but these are in-class practice strategies that can be used to help students start playing around with this idea of transferring what they've learned to these novel situations. You can also formatively assess students on novel phenomena. This is great to start getting that initial data and that initial understanding if your students can truly understand what has been taught to them up until this point. If you're only formatively assessing them on phenomena and situations they've seen, you're not necessarily getting the full picture if they can truly understand what has been covered so far. And then the last is making sure that when you're giving a summative assessment to see if they've truly mastered what you've taught them, is again to give that novel phenomena so we can really see if students can make sense of it. Because at the heart, that is kind of the goal of that is the goal of the NGSS. So the more and more opportunities that we give students to practice sense making, the more and more comfortable they're going to become with it. And it's just going to deepen their understanding even further. Now, if you're sitting here and you're like, that all looks great, how do I do that? Don't you worry. If you saw, this is actually a 4-part webinar series. This first series today is us essentially talking about what is truly science understanding and how to shift away from memorizing. And our next 3 webinars are going to be giving you really practical, usable strategies on how you can incorporate novel phenomena in classroom activities, informative assessment, and in summative assessment as well. So the first of the 3, we'll be talking about the sense-making practice activities, then formative assessment, and then summative assessment. Now, if you're sitting here right now and you're like, I need some novel phenomena like tomorrow, because we're already like cooking and like the ship is sailing, the school year has started. Within Inner Orbit, we have thousands of novel phenomena that are all tied to performance expectations and the NGSS. And there are actually a few different ways you can actually find this phenomena. And one of them is we've actually over the summer developed these curriculum tabs. So just saying, if you are using one of these curricula, you can easily navigate Inner Orbit in order to find novel phenomena and questions associated with those units and with that content. But if you're not using one of these curriculum, you can still easily access our site and still search different phenomena. But we've made this a little bit easier for those of you who do use this. So Julia just dropped in the chat another link that will lead you to our pilot interest survey. And this is a survey, it's fairly short, that is expressing your interest in potentially trying out Inner Orbit, and a member of our team will reach out to you right away to talk about further details. Speaking of which, Julia is going to go ahead and kind of recap what we've talked about today and give you some next steps if you're curious to learn more.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, everyone, so much for not only your audience participation in the chat that has been outstanding today, but also for being here and sticking with us all throughout these 30 minutes, 27 minutes. Today, we're finishing a little bit early. But just to wrap up some of these ideas, I hope that all of you are now able to recognize what is true science understanding and what it looks like in both instruction and assessment. So just to recap, sense making occurs when students connect what they already know, their prior knowledge, their skills and experience to grapple with something new. And that something new is usually a phenomenon that they've never seen before. These are the criteria for sense making, and putting all those dimensions together and tying it to a phenomenon or problem is what really has students engaging with the sense making and that productive struggle to actually meet those performance expectations. Now, again, if you're interested in trying out Inner Orbit with your school or just checking it out, if you're like, I don't know about this, but I would love to see it for myself, then you can fill out the interest form in the chat that I just dropped. There's no commitment to that. It's only you, and there's access that you can actually look at and maybe use in your classroom if you're interested. So please go ahead and fill it out if you want. If you're like, oh, I really like this content, where can I find more? Subscribe to your YouTube channel at Inner Orbit NGSS. We upload all of our webinars there, and hopefully soon enough, we'll be uploading some more videos, shorter videos about sense making, about phenomena, about the NGSS, the 3 dimensions, so you can interact with it. And if you have any feedback, you can always email us at inquiries@innerorbit.com. And that is all for today, all we have. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon. And if there's anything that you need, please let us know.